Hey guys, Tom Barclay here. I wasn't actually at the Etihad today. I was at Arsenal instead, watching Eberechi Eze be unveiled. So I wasn't able to speak to Thomas Frank and be at the game, but I did see it, and wow, I feel like I had to do a video on it anyway to review the game because just such an impressive performance all round. Really, really fantastic. You don't want to go overboard, and look, Spurs have been here before with new managers. Remember Nuno, he was manager of the month after his fantastic start, including beating Manchester City, and he lasted 17 games. I very much don't get the sense that's going to be the case with Thomas Frank, but the point being is, let's not get ahead of ourselves. But I think there were so many things to like about this performance, and to be honest, all the competitive performances so far. I mean, it sort of really goes to show how you can't take much away from pre-season at all, and anything you can do, if it's positive, you can probably need to rein it in a bit. I mean, Spurs' pre-season was a bit dull at times. I mean, there were some good performances, but nothing too great. And then obviously the Bayern Munich game was a bit worrying. But look, they're friendlies for a reason. I think in the competitive matches, there's been a lot to like. And I know it's always going to be different when a new manager comes in. And look, Ange won the Europa League. He'll always have that. So it's not to be disrespectful to sort of pick out things that do feel like they have improved. But there are notable changes and quick ones too, which to be honest, having watched Spurs struggle in the league so often last season, are very, very welcome. And I mean, there's so many places you can start in this performance at the City. I mean, remember, Ange won 4-0 at City last season, arguably Spurs' best result in recent Premier League history. So you can't take that away from him. And obviously, he was missing a lot of players last season, so all of that comes into context. But one of the things that I think I was a regular critic of last season, and to be honest, through most of Ange's time, was the midfield and how much it felt like it got overrun at times with his approach. I remember speaking to an agent of a player one day and thinking at the time personally that it was, defenders and up front where there was the main issue, and they said no, it's the midfield. That's where all the cause of the issue is. Players getting overrun, and it puts centre backs into situations where they're one on one, and all stems from there. And ever since that agent mentioned that, I couldn't help but notice it myself and feel like it was often a problem. Which is why when you watch this performance at Man City, you really it caught your eye how impressive the midfield was. I mean, the three of them, Bentancur, Sarr and Joao Palhinha, a sort of workman-like midfield. I mean, yes, we know Spurs are after a number 10. We know they wanted Eze, they wanted Gibbs-White. Obviously, Maddison's injured. But for a game like City away, this is probably the kind of midfield he would have picked anyway, Thomas Frank, to sort of counter City's strengths. And it just worked so well. They were so cohesive. They were so near each other a lot of the game and sort of worked together. There was that openness that I talked about under Postecoglou, which happened far too often, where it felt like the team got overrun as soon as they lost the ball and got exploited. That wasn't really there too much for Spurs today. They worked really, really well together. I mean, all three of them were fantastic, putting their bodies on the line. Sarr's energy, his running power, as Ange often used to say, is so impressive. And obviously got the flick on in the lead up to the goal, but for the opener. But you have to look at Palhinha, don't you? Obviously he scored, but that goal in itself was sort of born out of a fantastic press. I mean, terrible pass from James Trafford, who is definitely one of the most confident players I've ever interviewed. I remember interviewing him when I covered the England under-21s before the under-21 Euros back in 2023, the first time England won it. And to be fair to James Trafford, he went and won that competition without conceding a goal the whole time. But he'd just been on loan in League One with Bolton, and it was around the time that Man City had just played in the Champions League to win the treble, the Champions League final rather, and he was saying at the time he felt like he could play in the Champions League final now. He's definitely one of the most confident players, a very good player, but today he had a bit of a chastening experience, largely because of how much pressure Tottenham put him under, obviously in the lead up to the goal. But Palhinha finished it off after some good work from Richarlison. But all round, I mean, there were some blocks that Palhinha put in. We knew when he signed, a bit like Kudus with the dribbling stats, that Palhinha is all about tackles, isn't he? And Thomas Frank has just used that to Spurs' advantage straight away. He just looks like the kind of player that Spurs were really lacking last season. Really lacking, and fast looking like an absolute inspired bit of business to get him on loan. Again, only a couple of games in, but if you can play like that at the Etihad, then there's a reason why I think it's fair for fans to get excited. It just looks like I say, the player that Spurs have been missing for a while, adds that steel, that grit, that keenness to put his body on the line. And, obviously scored a goal as well. Fair play to him. I mean, just really, really good performance. It was quite interesting hearing him speak after the game as well, talking about why Spurs. And the first reason he gave was the manager. He said Thomas Frank was the first reason, and then obviously Spurs and being back in the Premier League as well. He seems like, even though he's a Portuguese player and not a native to the Premier League, Premier League seems like his adopted home. It's where it suits him best. His style of play, his strengths just really, really suit the sort of hurly-burly of the Premier League, more so than the Bundesliga. Although I do wonder, obviously Bayern won 6-0 at the weekend, and their competition is they dominate games all the time. I don't think they really need like a player with Palhinha's strength so much. Maybe in the Champions League they might miss him in certain games. Might look like they made a mistake loaning him out, but on a sort of weekly basis, I don't think he's really the kind of player they need to dominate the division like they do. But Tottenham certainly do. They're not in a position, no team really is, to be honest, in the Premier League, because the competition is so strong and so deep that you have games where you need to have players like that. And I think there'll be quite a few other clubs. Man United really struggling when it comes to that kind of position, I would say. And for Spurs to get him on loan looks like a fantastic bit of business, as I said. So he was great, but defensively so committed. The urgency in which players like Romero were pressing, players like Haaland racing out, really putting him under pressure, being really tight, was very impressive. I'm endlessly impressed by Jed Spence's one-on-one ability. We saw it in pre-season against Arsenal when he was playing Saka, and Max Dowman, who I've just watched today, being unbelievable for Arsenal in a 20-minute cameo for a 15-year-old, unbelievable. But Spence's one-on-one ability to go toe-to-toe with sort of jet-heeled and sort of fleet-of-foot wingers is really impressive, and I thought he did that again today against Oscar Bob, very impressive. And then obviously there was that Van de Ven flicked header. I mean, that is just right place, right time, right decision, great decision-making. I mean, Spurs, we know their centre-backs are, if not world-class, then very close. Romero's literally a World Cup winner. Van de Ven, when he stays fit, is about as good as there is in the Premier League and only getting better. I mean, it's just about the two of them obviously need to stay fit. That's the big question mark around them. But when they are fit and they're playing like this, they've got an excellent back four. But it's not just that. It's the way Frank has got them working together, committed, just really cohesive unit very, very quickly. Frank, after every game, I remember being at Reading for the first pre-season game. Admittedly, we didn't get to speak to Frank afterwards, but I remember watching that performance and then listening to his interview with Spurs Play. And whilst it wasn't a really sort of breathtaking game at all, he was talking about the importance of obviously set pieces, as we know, but particularly getting that clean sheet, setting in those good habits early on, and they've seemed to have continued that throughout. And there seems to be a love of defending in this team, which we certainly didn't see last season. Perhaps as a result of last season, so often, Spurs came away from games, even when they won, when they conceded goals far too often, were too open. Again, it led them to winning the Europa League. So I'm not sort of disparaging Ange in that way, but on a consistent Premier League basis, they need to improve. They needed to improve at the back. And Frank, again, a few games in, but so far against one of the most testing attacks in world football, and arguably the best striker around up there, Erling Haaland, they kept him out, and they did it through a really committed display. And that's very, very impressive from Frank's perspective, I think. And it's a nice balance to that back four now. Obviously, Udogie's coming back soon. Frank said before the game that he was in Friday's press conference that this game came too soon, but he's been training with the team. He should be back fairly soon, which is really good news because the doggy's a fantastic young player. But I quite like the balance of this back four, where you've got Spence, obviously he's a right-footer playing left-back, but it does really seem to suit him in that position where he's so good with these one-on-one positions, bombing on forward as well. You've got Romero and Van der Ven, fantastic pairing in the middle. And then Porro's like almost the creative outlet of the team, particularly at the moment when they haven't got this new signing in number 10 in through the door. But even if they did, like, I think that outlet, which to be fair, Aaron's used a lot last season, helping turn Porro into a really, really good right back when, if you remember before Postecoglou came in, there were a lot of question marks whether he could even play right back in the Premier League. But some of the deliveries today were fantastic from Porro. I mean, from Frank, to tactical flexibility. I mean, I went into this game thinking they're definitely going to go to a back five, just like they did against PSG. But it shows how little we know. And it seems like there are some managers who very much focus on what their own team can do. I'd say Andrew sort of fell into this category at times, and that's not a bad thing. But there are others that sort of adapt every week, and sometimes that can be a bad thing. But it seems like Frank's getting the right balance, at least in these early days, of switching things up and it working. Results just prove that. PSG, they really focused on set pieces. Burnley, I think he said the other day, it was all about the crossing that Burnley produce. City, I don't know, but it's obviously a different story, but he felt like a back forward work, and it certainly did. I was all expecting, having done that interview with Kevin Danzo, I was thinking this is a good week to interview Kevin Danzo because he's very likely to play in a back five and use that long throw lethal weapon to Spurs' advantage. But he only came on towards the end, didn't he, really? So it didn't work out that way, but it certainly worked out for Spurs in this particular game. But, defence, midfield, but up front they're good too. And then Richarlison, another solid performance, putting defenders under pressure, making good decisions. The goal that they scored, which Brentford, when Frank took over at Spurs, there was a lot of talk when you sort of analyse Brentford's games about how direct they could be, but a lot of the time it was the kind of direct you want from a team. Like I think the sniffiness around direct sides versus sort of possession-based teams has kind of moved on in the last few years. Like we had the years of the Sam Allardyce sort of long ball kind of merchants, which was very much looked down upon, to be honest, a little bit condescendingly, but I kind of got it. Some of the football wasn't great to watch. But then you had teams like Brighton's Graham Potter's Brighton team, who, maybe didn't catch the attention of a lot of people, but I watched them a lot. And whilst they were quite successful, they can be quite dull in the way they just passed the ball to death. And there were other teams that did that as well at a higher level. And I think there's a sort of understanding now that if you're going to have the ball, there's no point in having it, just keeping it sake. In fact, let's be honest, that's a well-worn sort of argument now. You've got to do something with it. And if that means being a bit more direct, if it's going to break chances through it, and not just from punting it long, but being a little bit more direct, then it's very much welcome. And that's kind of what we saw with the Frank's Brentford team quite a lot. And that's what we saw with that first goal today for Spurs. A great ball, a long ball down the pitch. Sarr breaks from midfield, lovely flick on, in a really, really good flick on. Richarlison times his run to perfection, gets on the ball, head up, brilliant delivery into the middle. And there's Johnson, who's got the absolute afterburners on with a finish. And I questioned a lot during pre-season how Johnson was going to work off the left, being quite sceptical about it once again, showing how little I know, but also how much can you read into pre-season, because that's when they're trying things. Just because it doesn't work then doesn't mean they're not working on it. But they seem to have really getting the most out of him. He's got 2 goals in 2 games, but it's not just that, it's him getting in the right positions to maximise his strengths. We know that's where he's best at. He's a good finisher, a very good finisher. He's good at getting in behind, racing onto things. And whilst last season it felt like that right wing position was ideal for him, well, quite quickly he's kind of doing a similar thing off the left, and it's to Frank's credit that he's getting that much out of him so quickly. What else is there to say, really? I suppose it was an all-round very, very good performance. Brilliant from Frank. I suppose the big point to be made, really, off the back of it is that they've got to go and back it up with a couple of signings. really, ideally, 1 or 2 signings before the end of the window. We know they've been looking for a number 10 for a long time. We know they missed out on Eze. Like, I was at Arsenal, as I say, today, and I saw Eze presented to the crowd before kickoff. Arsenal are really going to need him now. After all, it looks like Odegaard and particularly Saka might be out for a while with the injuries they picked up. That's for an Arsenal podcast. But obviously, Eze's gone. That's fine. As Frank said, he wants players who really want to play for the team, which makes perfect sense. They didn't get Gibbs White either. They're going to have to look around for somebody else. But you look at Spurs' starts of the season. It's not just the results. Because, as I said from the tops, we've been here before. Tottenham making fast starts under new managers. It's quite a common theme. Spurs winning at Man City happens way more often than you think, as the fans enjoyed pointing out to their counterparts in the game. But it's the way they've been going about it and the way they're talking as well. I'm really, really appreciating the way Frank is keeping very level-headed, not getting ahead of himself. He listens to questions and answers in a sort of shrewd way, in a clever way, in a way that maybe this is not as relevant to fans, but from a PR perspective, I think he gets the right line by saying, is it a statement win? No, it's one of the better ones. That's a nice line. It's not saying that. It's not putting pressure by saying, look, we've made a statement here, and it's not underplaying the achievement they've just made. It sounds harder than it is to be able to get that kind of wording out to sort of get the right note. And I think the note that he's striking is one of, I'm building something here. We're not getting ahead of ourselves. I'm adapting. I'm paying tribute to the good things we're doing, but I'm not saying with a finished article by any stretch. And it's being reflected when you hear the other players talk. So Brennan Johnson after the game, obviously the hero of the Europa League run and the final, top scorer last season, very much saying they're enjoying work under Frank, but pointing out all the things they need to keep working on. I think a lot of players have been here before as well, so they know not to get ahead of themselves. But Frank is speaking with a lot of authority and experience now. Not unsurprisingly, I know he's in sort of new territory, managing a club like Tottenham, starting Champions League for the first time, but he also has been a manager in the Premier League for a long time. He's won at Man City before, like he did when Tony scored twice. And yeah, I'm impressed, I have to say, on that front, and obviously with his performances. But as I said, they've got to back it up with a signing or two, because as much as it worked here, and it was a fantastic performance, we are at that stage, and my good friend George Sessions in the latest Tottenham Way podcast made this point. We're at this stage of the season where it's one game a week. Frank is using all his nous, his tactical acumen, his experience to chop and change his team, his formation, everything. He's got good time to prepare his side ahead of each game. Where it becomes very tricky is when you're starting to get, as Ange found last season, you start getting into the relentlessness of what will be this season, Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday, Sunday games, and it's no longer just sort of September, October, November. It's into December and January now with the extended Champions League format. So that's where it will really come to kick in, and when injuries will start to kick in, because no doubt they will. And that is why they need to build on it with new signings. And I think, when you look at the squad, they are really lacking that playmaker with Maddison injured. And whilst they haven't really needed it so far, you just only have to look at how clever Frank is in mixing things up to sort of realise how much he could get out of signing one. There'll come games when I already trust him from watching how he's dealt with Spurs so far and how he's mixed it up, that he would be able to get the best out of a player like that, because he's lacking that in his team at the moment. So Spurs really do need to make the most of it. But they've got an opportunity here with some of the fixtures coming up to make a really fast start. Now, we saw that with Tottenham under Ange in his first season. I mentioned Nuno. There are other examples of really good starts. Remember that Conte season, which started results-wise really, really well until they lost at Sporting Lisbon with those 2 late goals. Ruben Amorim's Sporting Lisbon. So we're not in uncharted territory here, but you look at the fixtures: Bournemouth at home to come, West Ham away. West Ham always a difficult fixture to a certain extent for Spurs, but West Ham look in absolute dire straits at the moment. Brighton away, regularly a tough fixture for Spurs in recent years, but I think that's it's not. They can go the way they're playing at the moment and have a good chance of winning. And then Wolves at home, who look like one of the teams, one of the sort of Premier League regulars of the last few years, who really do look like they're in danger this season. So a really good chance for them to capitalise on this excellent start. But I just say, just wow, what a performance at City, for so many reasons that I can see why after a difficult week with I guess it's embarrassment really more than anything with the Eze situation. Like, I mean, Spurs have missed out on players before, but to miss out to Arsenal is just painful for supporters, particularly off the back of the Gibbs White situation, and historically, you know, the likes of Grealish and Dybala and other players where it feels like they've had the chance to buy them and they've just taken too long and then they've missed out, seemingly like through their own fault rather than others. Whether that's really ever the case, I don't know. But the mood had really dampened, and I think there was some sort of anti-Daniel Levy chance today, but the mood's been lifted so much from this particular win. And it's funny, like, I mean, I said before the game in the press conference to Frank about how, you know, the mood could be lifted with a result, and he sort of joked, you know, mood be lifted. You know, we've obviously ran PSG really close, we beat Burnley. He didn't see it that way, but again, I just think he sort of strikes the right note. I mean, I'm impressed. It's been a great start. Let me know what you think, guys. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do they need to do? How much they can capitalise on it? And what have you seen so far that's really, really impressed you and caught your eye? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments. Cheers, guys.